Hello my dears, welcome back to another video. Today's video, we are going to be talking about labels. Lately it feels like people are obsessed with labels. They're obsessed with labeling themselves, they're obsessed with labeling others, and so I wanted to kind of discuss why that seems to be the case and is any of this actually new? Human beings love to categorize things and love to put things in boxes. It helps us to understand the world around us, and it also makes it a lot easier for us to communicate. For example, if we didn't call this a pen, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about if I was to say to you, I really need a pen. And this is the reason why it's very important for us to have very clear and objective definitions for words and labels. Because if words have subjective meanings and mean different things to different people, you might as well completely scrap the word or the label altogether because it's useless. It doesn't communicate anything because no one will know what you're talking about. Our love for labeling things extends past just objects, but also applies to people. We find it a lot easier to categorize and label people because it makes it easier for us to understand information about them. So for example, rather than someone telling me their views on the ethics of consuming animals or telling me what foods they will and won't eat, if they just simply said they are a vegetarian, then I would be able to get all of that information from them in much less time. So labels can also be a very useful way at conveying a lot of information, but in a very quick and concise way. However, many today feel that we've become a little too obsessed with labels. And to be honest with you, there was a time when I would have agreed with this. I would have said, yes, I do think that our generation has become a little bit too obsessive with labels. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that not really. There's nothing remotely new or revolutionary about this. Before, people used to be obsessed with subcultures like goths and hipsters and emos and grunge and punk. It's just the only difference with now is that people have just decided to be obsessed with different types of labels. Rather than being obsessed with these subcultures, people are now choosing to base all their labels around politics or sexuality or gender identity. Although I will caveat and say that the main difference between this generation and the generations that came before us when it comes to labels is that previously companies, corporations, politicians, etc. didn't get as involved in the label obsession as much as they do today. And because we also have access to social media, we're seeing a lot more of this stuff than we would have done when we didn't have social media. Now, because it's so much more in people's faces, it feels a lot more intense than it did before. Our obsession with labels and categories and groups has been such a key part of adolescent development that it's even been featured in a lot of TV shows and films, especially within American ones. A lot of the American films and TV shows always had distinct groups. You had the jocks, you had the cheerleaders, you had the nerds, you had the drama kids. It was such a common theme within a lot of shows like Glee, as well as movies like Mean Girls, where you had the plastics and you had other subcategories. There was a whole song about this on High School Musical. I remember the song Stick to the Status Quo. They feel as though they're restricted within their groups, but really they have other interests and other things that they like to do. But the members within their group are telling them to stick to the status quo. Don't speak about the other sides of your personality because you are part of this group.
Well, if Troy can tell his secret, then I can tell mine. I bake. What? I love to bake. Strudel, scones, even apple pandowdy. Not another sound. Someday, I hope to make the perfect creme brulee.
So because of that, I don't really think this whole obsession with labels and identity is anything remotely new. I honestly do truly believe that all that's changed is the types of things that we choose to label ourselves with. And I'm sure that once this generation grows up and the new one comes along, the new generation will have a whole new set of identity labels that they'll obsess over as well. I think the biggest reason why young people in particular are a lot more predisposed to obsessing over labels and identity categories is because young people are the least secure within their identity. When you are going through your adolescence, this is a period of your life where you're a lot more conscious about where you fit in. A lot of young people start to care more about who they are and where they belong. And as human beings, this is something that has always been very important to us because we are very tribal. As much as some people don't like hearing me say this, yes, human beings are animals, okay? Yes, we are. We have some instincts that are driven by biology, and one of those things is the desire to seek out a tribe. Tribalism tribalism is one of our human instincts. We have a drive to seek out community and to feel as though we are a part of something. Now, evolutionary psychologists have argued that this could be one of the reasons why we evolved to feel loneliness. And the reason why they've argued for why this could be is because you are much more likely to survive if you have a pact, if you have a tribe, if you are part of a larger community compared to if you're on your own. So historically, being part of a community or being part of a tribe has always been essential for our survival. And so we've evolved to feel the feeling of loneliness to force us to go and seek out that tribe so that we can increase our own rates of survival. It's interesting because this idea is kind of played out within gang culture. So I've listened to people who've worked with young people who were part of gangs. And one of the things that they say is that some of the time, these young men don't join gangs because they want to be a part of a gang. They join the gang for protection reasons. They realize that it's a lot more dangerous for them to be their own standalone person than it is for them to be part of a gang.
It can sometimes be dangerous not to join your local gang. I was asked to come and speak to a boy in Croydon who had got involved in a knife incident, crushing at school, really good at school, never had no police. And they were like, what happened? So I went to speak to him and I was like, this is a real change in your behaviour. He's like, Sean, bruv, it's the only way to make sure they leave me alone. I said, like, what, does your local gang have beef with somebody? He said, no, it's not a beef thing. It's not like I'm going out and other kids are seeing me from a estate and say, right, let's get him. It's the kids on my estate. They're basically saying you're with us or you're against us. So it was like much less physically dangerous to be with them. And people need to understand the complexity and, quite frankly, the sophistication of gangs.
And it's interesting because our understanding of loneliness and our understanding of the fact that human beings need human connection is also why solitary confinement is considered to be one of the worst punishments that you can give to a human being, because everything about it goes completely against our human nature. So it acts as a very effective form of torture. So why am I talking about all of this? Why am I talking about loneliness? Why am I talking about people's need to have a tribe? Well, the reason why I'm talking about this is because I personally think that one of the driving forces for why young people are so obsessed with labels and identities is because they need to figure that out in order for them to find their community. According to a YouGov report, a lot of young Brits report feeling loneliness. Nearly half of the young Brits surveyed also said they found it very difficult to make friends. There have been multiple articles like this one by Forbes reporting on a CDC survey that was done during the pandemic, which found that young people are the most affected by loneliness. 63% of them also suffered with depression and anxiety symptoms, and nearly a quarter of the young people surveyed reported that they had either started or increased their use of substances such as alcohol, marijuana, or prescription drugs in order to cope with these emotions. Because a lot of Western societies have gotten rid of a lot of things that used to encourage community building, it's kind of encouraged people to become a lot more isolated. For example, we're a lot more secular now than we used to be. Now, regardless of your own personal views on religion, that's not really the point. The undeniable fact is religion has always offered people a sense of community. Places of worship offer people a reason to go out and socialize with others. So whether that's people congregating in a church or any other places of worship, they offered people a reason to go out and socialize and integrate with each other. But now that Western societies have become a lot more secular, these things have been removed from our cultural norms, and so therefore you also lose the community building benefits that also came with them. Digitalization has also made it easier for us to go for long periods of time without seeing people. Because we have the option of video calling and many other digital forms of interaction, it has made people do less of what they used to, such as hanging out at coffee shops or teen clubs. Young people used to also go to the park a lot with their friends. Dating apps have also eradicated the need for speed dating events, which used to be held often at bars and pubs. The way we work has also changed. Nowadays, especially since the pandemic, a lot of people are now able to work from home, which again just limits the reasons for people to go in and have a reason to socialize with others. When you take away the need for people to go into the office and work, you also take away the social benefits that came with that as well. So because of all these cultural changes and technological changes, it has resulted in people becoming a lot more isolated. Another possible factor for why Gen Z in particular might be feeling a lot more isolated or a lot more lonely lonelier is because the forms of socialization that are available to them don't seem to be very appealing. There's been loads of reports that Gen Z are not drinking anywhere near as much as the previous generation. So it seems as though going out for work drinks and going to the club are not things that appeal to them. And as we lose more and more of the other options for socializing that don't involve things like partying or drinking, this could be also contributing to why they're seeking out communities online instead. So I do think this is also driving the obsession with identities and labels, because in order for people to join any of these online communities, they first need to know what label they are or what identity they are, so they know which is the right community for them. Labels themselves are not inherently bad. However, when we become a little bit too fixated on them, that's when we start to see the more negative sides of tribalism, such as rivalry and conflict. We can see signs today that the online communities are very tribal through their gatekeeping and the way that they treat people who deviate from their groups in any way. For example, within the body positivity movement, if you lose weight, you will be shunned. This is what happened to Adele.
People are talking about your weight and all in your business about it. And I want to know, what has the experience of losing this been like for you, and also people's reaction to it?
I'm not shocked or even fazed by it, because my body has been objectified my entire career. I'm either too big, I'm either too small, like, you know, I'm either hot or I'm either not, like whatever. I never looked up to anyone because of their body. You know, I never admired anyone because they had the same hair color as me or the same style as me or, you know, whatever. So,
or were the same weight as you?
Never.
And when you were heavier, you were fine?
I was body positive then, and I'm body positive now. But it's not my job to validate how people feel about their bodies. And I feel bad that, you know, it's made anyone feel horrible about themselves. But that's not my job. And I can't. I'm trying to sort my own life out.
Also, Lizzo experienced this too when she posted TikToks of herself drinking green juices and discussed how she was on a detox. Many within the body positivity movement do have quite a tribal us versus them mentality in terms of how they talk about people who are slimmer than them, and also how they speak about people who are actively trying to lose weight.
So, intentional weight loss, so you purposely saying, I want to lose 20 pounds, is fat phobic. And you might be like, what? Oh my goodness. I'm not trying to be fat phobic, but you are. You're being fat phobic to yourself. Why do you want to lose 20 pounds? It's probably to fit into something smaller. It's probably so people treat you better. It's probably for all the reasons that fat folks are shamed simply for being fat. So by continuing to perpetuate that, right, seeking intentional weight loss, we are contributing to our fat phobic society. So that's why intentional weight loss is fat phobic.
Although I have used the body positivity movement as an example, this is not something that is unique to them by any means. Chris Williamson also spoke about how a researcher who he spoke to had observed this trend within the incel community too.
I had Nama Cates on, who did a ton of research into the incel community. And in these black pill communities, which are basically nihilism, for anyone that doesn't understand it, it's kind of like relationship nihilism for men, typically. And what she said was that anybody that suggests any small hint of ascending, which would be a girl in a coffee shop smiled at me today. It's not even going for a date or I got a girl's number. It's any tiny little sliver of attention from the female gender. That, as soon as you do that, as soon as you show in any of these forums, these black pill forums, that you may have had a little bit of attention, as soon as you show that, that's you out. You're ostracized from the group. And the reason for that is that it gives undue, the subtext for the reason for that is it gives undue hope to the other people in that group. Well, if this guy has managed it, then maybe so am I. And it's how would you say? It's a loyalty. It's a show of loyalty that you're not prepared to try and ascend, right? It is a sacrifice for the group. Look, I'm putting the interests of the group over the interests of my own happiness. And I think in Red Pill, it's almost the same, that it's a commitment to seeing women as a means to an end, to committing to this particular narrative around them being gold diggers or being able to move from man to man very, very quickly.
We also see this happening with online politics as well, with the most recent example being Brexit in the UK and Trump running for office in the US. These two events did cause the two sides to become very tribal, and I would say still cause them to be very tribal. Other issues with labels is that people are no longer just obsessed with labeling themselves. They also now seem to be obsessed with labeling other people. And I think this is part of what is quite annoying about the obsession with labels, is how people can't be satisfied with just labeling themselves. They are now creating labels for you too, especially when it comes to politics. I notice this the most. The idea of you just simply having opinions because of your own personal experiences or your own personal views is not a concept. Every single opinion you have is a political opinion, because to people who are, I call them politically possessed, because they don't behave like normal people. They behave like they're possessed by politics. I don't know how to explain them, but they're very bizarre. So these people are the type of people who believe that everything you say and think is political, and so therefore any message that you put forward has to be coming from a political place. And so if you don't specifically say that you are part of this political group or political whatever, they will have like a lot of distrust towards you, and they'll think of you as being some kind of like undercover something, because God forbid you just have opinions because of your life experiences. Like, that's not a concept. Every opinion you have is because you're trying to push a political agenda on some kind or some form or whatever. And on a human level, I understand it. I understand this behavior, because I do think if we accept that human beings can be very, very tribal, then it makes sense as to why some people think it's very, very important to be able to identify you. So if you're an ambiguous person who doesn't explicitly state what your label is or what your tribe is or whatever, then it makes people very distrusting of you, because they're not quite sure, you know, who you are and who you represent, because you could be representing the enemy. So they want to know clearly who you represent, you know, because to them it's important information, because they clearly have a side that they've sworn allegiance to. And so I understand it on a human level, but on a personal level, I just find these people to be very annoying. Another issue with labeling other people is that it can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, this can be a problem if the labels that you are giving people are very negative. In Madeleine Pownell's article titled "Are We Too Obsessed with Labels?" she discussed labeling theory, which argues that overly defining people by extreme labels often creates self-fulfilling prophecies. A self-fulfilling prophecy is when someone naturally succumbs to the stereotypes associated with the label they have been given. And I also see this happening when it comes to things like racism too. There are some people who are taking it to the direction of, do you know what? Well, if you think I'm a racist, if you're going to treat me like I'm a racist, you're going to treat me like one anyway, so I might as well just be one. There are some people who are actually going in that direction, where they're just so sick and tired of being accused of being racist for every single thing that they do, that they've just now reached the point of, why bother trying? Why bother trying to be friendly to certain groups of people if they're going to always treat me like I am this thing that I'm not? Other negative labels that I've also seen have a negative impact on people is the whole oppressed versus oppressor label. Now, this applies in so many different scenarios. This applies to gender, this applies to race. I've seen a lot of young black people express feeling very demoralized and quite nihilistic because they don't believe they can accomplish anything, because the whole system is designed against them, because they've been taught to view things that way. So as a result, the adults who had said to them that they're going to struggle to succeed because of the color of their skin have actually caused them to struggle to succeed because of the color of their skin, because now they're demoralized and have no motivation to try and strive to accomplish anything because they don't think they will be able to because of the color of their skin. Is it really any wonder that so many young black boys in particular end up playing outside of the system and getting themselves either killed or in prison when they've been taught from a young age that the whole system is designed against them? Why would they want to play inside a system that they've been taught is rigged? But I guess the people who teach this to young children would describe what they're doing as compassionate, whereas I would describe it as them displaying their bigotry of low expectations. The other negative about labels is that it can also have a very negative way in the terms of how we treat people. People will use labels as a justification for treating people in very inhumane ways. This whole idea of labeling someone as something and then treating them in very inhumane ways is hardly anything new. I mean, when I think about what happened during the 1600s, during the Salem witch trials, in which young girls were accusing men and women of being witches and causing them to be hung. When we look back throughout history, we can find multiple examples where a group was singled out and demonized and labeled negatively, and as a result of this vilification, these groups were subjected to the most inhumane treatment. This degree of tribalism and the action of dehumanizing or vilifying a group of people has historically led us down some very dark roads, and historically it's what has led us to genocides. And I mean, you can understand why that would happen, right? If you conclude that a group of people are the problem, when you vilify a person as opposed to simply criticizing their ideas, it's a logical conclusion that if the person is the thing that is evil, then you must of course get rid of the person. So it makes sense as to why historically people who've had this kind of attitude and worldview have typically led us down some very dark paths. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be violence. In the modern day, we've seen examples of people being given labels which didn't necessarily cause them physical harm, but definitely destroyed their careers or destroyed their livelihood. Aside from loneliness, I also think that another reason why our generation is so obsessed with labels is because our generation has kind of lived through the era of narcissism. There's a lot of things within our modern culture that encourage us to be a lot more self-centered and self-centric. So for example, we promote things like self-help, self-love, self-care, self-discovery journeys, self, I, accompanied with the fact that in the Western world, we do enjoy a lot of privileges. And so because of these privileges, they give us a lot more free time to think about ourselves a lot more than we really should. So naturally, if we have that much free time to be constantly thinking about ourselves and analyzing ourselves, it would make sense that we would start to over-obsess over our identities and what labels we want to pick up and adopt. If you are someone who's very narcissistic, then labels can be very beneficial for you. If you are someone who's very narcissistic, but maybe you lack any actual useful skill or any actual useful talent, then you can just utilize a label and be celebrated and practically worshipped purely because of your identity label. An obsession with labels tends to set the stage for things like identity politics. Labels have now been able to give people authority, especially within politicians recently. They've been doing this really bizarre thing where they will announce all of these identity details about themselves that have absolutely no relevance to whether or not they are qualified to do their job or not. In the UK, when the Tories had that leadership campaign thing, whatever, and Liz Truss kept going on and on about how she went to a comprehensive school, and Rishi Sunak just kept going on about his immigrant parents, and it's just like, that's nice. What are you going to do about the fact that food is so damn expensive? You know, like what are you going to do about the fact that my utility bills are costing me an arm and a leg? You know what I mean? I don't really care about your background. What are you going to do about the economy? Because it's killing me, bruh. And I think it's become clear to many that the purpose of these announcements is not because they are of any actual use to us as voters. It's not because they convey anything about the competence of these politicians, but more so the reason why they are done is to be more emotive. They're supposed to appeal to us on an emotional level. If you convey that you are working class, then working class people are supposed to feel seen by you. They're supposed to feel represented by you. If you convey that you are from an immigrant background, then people who come from that background are also supposed to feel connected to you and supposed to be more trusting of you. It's purely done to emotively appeal to you. You know, like, so for example, someone like me, if I see a black woman who maybe comes from an immigrant background, I'm supposed to feel connected to her. I'm supposed to feel like, oh, okay, she has my best interest at heart. And I've always found this really interesting because it's almost as if we're supposed to pretend that groups don't harm each other. I'm supposed to pretend that black people don't harm black people. You know, we're supposed to pretend that gay people never harm gay people. So I've always found that very, very bizarre. This idea that you're supposed to automatically trust someone just because they look like you or just because they are from a similar background to you. But it's effective. As much as I hate that it's so effective, because I think people should be voting based on policies, not what people look like or what people's backgrounds are. And I also don't understand. I don't understand party loyalty. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand how someone can be loyal to a political party. I don't get it. I am not loyal to any party, okay? My vote is conditional every single election. I don't trust politicians. The only people I'm loyal to are my loved ones. These politicians, nope. The amount of loyalty that some people have to politics or to political positions honestly blows my mind. There are some people willing to disown family members over differences in political views. I'm sorry, that's so unhinged. There's no way I can accept that as a normal thing to do. That is crazy. I think your relationship with politicians should be extremely transactional. Our generation seems to have this approach to relationships. I've seen these like really cringy videos where people are like, what do you bring to the table? Why don't you have this energy for politicians? You've been voting for the same party for like 10 years and they've done nothing for you, but you still vote for them anyway. So in conclusion, I do really strongly believe that our fixation on labels and identities, when it comes to the younger generation in particular, I do think that with them, it's mostly driven by a desire to belong somewhere, a desire to find a community. And so I do think that is one of the driving forces. As we become more lonely, as we become more isolated, people have this craving to have that sense of community more and more and more. And so the more people go on the internet to try and substitute for real life communities, the more people are going to become a bit more fixated on these identities, because you kind of need to figure out what identity you are part of to know what online community to be a part of. I think that our Western cultures don't really do a very good job of encouraging community building. If you're going to throw away all of these traditional pillars that encourage community building, you should replace them with effective alternatives, because you can't just demolish things and expect the benefits to still exist, because that's obviously not going to happen. When you demolish the old tradition or old institution, you're also going to lose the benefits that come with it. And I don't think that's something we really think about when we just completely get rid of old traditions or old cultural norms. We never really ask ourselves, why was this put here in the first place? We just think, I can't immediately see the benefits of this right now, so let's just get rid of it. As if the people who came before us all those thousands of years didn't come to this conclusion because of something. And I don't think for a second that it's a coinky-dink that the people who are the most likely to seek out online communities typically are people who don't have friends and who also don't have strong bonds with their families. And so I do think that it's not enough to just criticize young people for being super obsessed with labels and super obsessed with identities or whatever, because we also need to understand like why exactly it is that they're obsessed with it. What void are they trying to fill? A lot of things that come with modernity and these new technological advancements have increased a lot of people's loneliness and a lot of people's isolations. I think on one hand, I think we as individuals need to do more to be more engaged and more interactive with our loved ones. And on a cultural level, I also think that our cultures should be doing more to encourage community and to push more community-centric things. But that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure there are also a ton of other reasons that I didn't address in this video for why people might be so attracted to labels. So do let me know down in the comments if you can think of any. If you enjoyed this video, then you may as well like and subscribe. I am also on other socials and I also make music. Links to all of that will be in my description box. Thank you very, very much for giving me your time today, and I will see you in my next video.